I actually think it's incredibly hard to have company culture. The companies that say this is our culture, this is who we are, they have a bit of a, if we say it, it will be mindset. I say to people often that it's hard to have this company culture. There's often manager cultures. If you're to think about it, often your experience is shaped not by people in the C-suite, but on a day-to-day basis. But what often sets it is the culture that your direct manager sets. That's the biggest fault, is organizations that are believing that culture is a benefit or a statement or a value. That's the biggest fault, I think, is.
What do you think culture is, and where do companies get this wrong? Because I feel like this is something we hear all the time, company culture. And the companies that say they have it are usually the ones that don't have it, and the ones that have it, they know it, but they don't have to talk about it. I'm just curious to your experience and what you've seen.
I actually think it's incredibly hard to have company culture. And I think the companies that say this is our culture, this is who we are, and especially the ones that have it all positive and don't talk about some of the tougher parts of it, I think they tend to invest very heavily in PR, in marketing, and have a bit of a, if we say it, it will be mindset, to bring a little Field of Dreams-ish analogy, but they're not actually thinking about how it comes to life. Because I've, in my career have worked in many squares, from a Subway sandwich artist to being a lawyer, to cold calling, to sitting in boardrooms. And what I've seen is the higher that you are in that ladder, and you believe in the organizational ladder, you really do believe that there can be a company culture, and it just takes everybody buying into it. But you're separating yourself out from figuring out how it actually happens. I say to people often that it's hard to have this company culture. There's often manager cultures. If you're going to look at Glassdoor, for example, I've done this at places I've worked, and I will look at Glassdoor and I will see comments. I'm like, that says it very much to a T. And sometimes I think I know exactly who wrote that, but you do see common themes. Other times you will look and you will see so many different versions of corporate culture or organizational culture for government, nonprofit. But what often sets it is the culture that your direct manager sets. If you're to think about it, jobs that you've had, those listening, often your experience is shaped not by people in the C-suite. Sometimes it can, obviously, you sit through company meetings, the benefits that you have, but on a day-to-day basis, so much is shaped by what the leadership looks like, from your direct manager through their lines. And so that's the biggest fault, I think, is organizations that are believing that culture is a benefit or a statement or a value, but never having the conversations with managers about what that looks like, that it doesn't magically happen, and it's really their role to help to lead that. But also then for the employees about how it comes to life and really create those moments. And so that's the gap I see, is not really looking at how it's actually executed and recognizing that humans can look at all the words on a careers page, but the reality is the day-to-day experience.
Well, what's kind of funny to that point, such a great point. And what I find is the bigger an organization gets, the harder culture becomes at a grander scale. And to your point, the more micro it becomes. Who is directly responsible for you? Who are you responsible for? How are we impacting each other's lives on a day-to-day basis? How are we showing up to lead? How are we being led? Are we loving what we do? Are we complaining about it all the time? All these things matter. But having started a company from the ground up, right? And there's 3 people, and you're building it in a room, and you're not telling anyone, and then you go live, and then it goes from 3 to 5 and 5 to 10. There's something about the small build that I think is almost like the small family. I think back to having my 2 boys and my wife and I, and our 4 pod of family, and how in the future that will change, right? They both live away, so it's already changed in a little bit of a manner, but then they'll add someone new to that equation, and then we'll have an extended family, and it's never the way that it was in those small little sections, when you remember those moments, but our memories aren't often what reality is either. And so I just think I've had the pleasure of working for Fortune 500 companies and working with them where I had great independence, but I was super frustrated. I couldn't change the trajectory of anything. It was like, oh, this is a really good idea. And I would call the head of that, whoever led that. And I was like, this is we could change this. This is how we could change it. And what I didn't understand is there were 7 more steps and 20 more people. And so I would say the culture was corporate or it was stagnant. That was my experience. And then when I had the chance to change it, I found myself sometimes in similar roles where someone would call me and say, hey, why aren't you just doing this? It's a great idea, but it just doesn't work that way. And so the exposure to that changes. So that's how I interpret what you're talking about.
I love it a lot. And I think I sometimes explain management to people as, the realities that you don't understand what things are like until you've experienced it at times. And being a manager, one caveat is I do not think anyone, including senior leaders of any organization, should have to experience something to be able to appreciate it. And that's where I think real leadership can be. But I explain to people sometimes is if you've gotten married but before you got married, you knew someone that was getting married and you weren't invited to their wedding. And you're what? Like, I'm not invited. Like, are you really? Like, are you kidding me? And then you get married and you realize what it's like to think about everything from the invite list to the realities of plus ones to the seating charts, all the logistics that go into it. And all of a sudden you start understanding, oh gosh, now I totally understand why I was married. And then you may get to another phase of life where you're like, I don't really want to go to that many weddings right now. I'm totally good not being. And so I just think when you start to experience things, being a manager can be like that. I mean, I remember my first day of my corporate job or my first week, I was doing in sales. I did this before I went to law school. I was cold calling chief financial officers for the Fortune 1000 chief financial officers. And we were going through training. And I don't know who I thought I was, but I came up with a list of like 20 ideas that I had for the business to grow the business. Mind you, this was a publicly traded company that was growing 25% every quarter. They clearly had some things figured out. But I had these ideas and gave them to my training manager. I mean, I still laugh. Like, I cringed. I have no idea whatever happened with these. But you have all these ideas of things that are possible. Of course, then like I advance in my career and I think, oh my gosh, I was such a weirdo the first week trying to suggest these changes. But as you get on, you kind of get to this middle place to think, you know what? It's great when you have people that give ideas. It is important to have an understanding of some things are going to get adopted, some things aren't. It's also important for managers to be able to have that conversation and explain. I want to hear your ideas, your questions. Some things I won't know the answer to. Some ideas won't get implemented, but to really help to refine people. And that's a lot of what I've tried to do using my career quilt and what I do now.
Yeah, I love that though. See, I actually think that to some extent it's not cringe at all. I think that what you had was in you from the beginning. And when greatness is inside of you and you know it and not everybody else knows it, yes, there's a timeline of which you have to prove it or show it or do it. But the reality is it doesn't change the quality of the idea. When I was like 29 years old, I joined a Rotary Club. It was like all the movers and shakers in our town. And I went to the worst event I've ever been to. It was a spaghetti dinner. And I grew up, in an Italian Catholic family. I'm like, this is going to be great. And I've told the story 1,000 times, but the funniest part about this is the very shortened version is I came back and complained. I was like, what are we doing? All this room is the movers and shakers in our city, the head of the leaders of the city, the biggest companies, the city council people, the superintendent of schools. Like, why are we not changing the trajectory? We're doing weak work because that's how it always was done. And somebody said, well, you can run it. And so I started a wine festival 15 years ago. 8,000 people came year one. We donated $175,000 to charity. And the funniest thing, Ashley, is that now, 16 years later, and almost $3 million donated to local charities and all this cool stuff that's happened, I think back of the fight that I had to have. They actually tried to do like a barbecue, and we're in Virginia. There's barbecues all the time. And I won by like one vote in the board meeting because some guy decided to give the young guy a chance, right? And the average age was like 30 years older than me, not like 10 years older. And the point I'm getting at is I found myself in a board meeting 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and somebody comes up with a new idea. And I'm thinking the same thing. I'm like, dude, they're never going to do what they say they're going to do. They're going to talk about it. I've watched 14 people fail. And now I'm sitting at the other side of that, cringing at the fact that this person's coming up with an idea that they haven't even asked anybody that runs the other events about. And I went home that night and I was like, you know what? I need to flip this. I've got to give the same kind of blind, and this is not a company, so I want to say this is nonprofit. So there's a little bit of chance I could take. But the point was it made for such a great opportunity and a learning experience for me just to remember who I was. And when I think of you doing that, I think of the kind of person that was obviously trying to change the world from the time they were brand new, from the time they had just started.
Wow, I appreciate that. You have now I can sleep at night because I wake up every day at 3:30 thinking about this list I gave over, decades later wondering what's happened. But I actually I love that you use that example because and I know you gave the caveat of it's nonprofit, sometimes things feel like lower stakes, but I actually think even in for-profit companies in big time decisions, there's so much that you can do. It's a sliding scale, but that instinct, especially as leaders, and whether you're a first time manager or senior leader, you often are thinking about this aspect of protecting your team. And I say this comes from a very good place. Often it's okay. Well, I don't want them to get embarrassed or ashamed or lose their job. I selfishly, if my boss, others are looking at this, I don't want them to think I'm a terrible leader because my team has some bad idea. You're often thinking about this, but when you're protectionist, you build this little fence. You're not building a high performance team or mindset because you're really limiting what's possible. And again, generally for good reason. And so the way that plays out so often in meetings is someone's, yeah, I have this idea, and shut them down. We've tried that before. I can tell you later what happened. Everyone's chuckling like how it happened. But when you pause and think about flipping the script on this and giving opportunities, and often it may be using, okay, this experience with their idea to think about how we can pivot and try that differently. That is where you can change, because in that that conversation, you can take someone, like if I had given these ideas over, for example, and the manager had laughed and shut it down and said, don't share this with anyone, which, may have been the right answer, but
Right.
I could have been embarrassed and shirked, and that could have affected, no joke, that could have affected my whole career. But by having those opportunities and giving that, in listening to people's ideas and shaping that and thinking what's possible, it absolutely is a way to really have such an impact, not just, that idea or decision, but far longer than that.
Yeah, my wife and I were having this conversation this weekend. I told you we were in Puerto Rico, and we call these ROM weeks or weekends where it's to rekindle our marriage. We've been doing it for 20 something years, and the goal is just get away from everything else so that we can remember that we like each other, not just love each other. And I was talking about as we get older how important it is in business and anything that we do, friendship, to always have friends that are a minimum of like 10 years older and another set that are 10 years younger, because the decades remind us of things. The decades before us, they're a little older, a little wiser. They're the ones that are on the beach, like my wife and I were, when the couples walk by with their kids and they're literally exhausted. They're on vacation. They look like they've been to war. The kids are driving them crazy. And my wife and I are sitting there just looking at these families going, you have no idea. You are in the greatest moment of your life. You will look at pictures of this moment and you will remember how you felt, but you'll only remember how awesome it was to begin this life, to the little things that they did. And then you have that's the older, and then the younger ones are also the ones that remind you how much you can still accomplish or how to pivot when you need to pivot. We had an employee once, we started to grow pretty fast, and we decided everyone was asking for a career ladder. So something very new that I was always kind of anti was, if I say that we're going to take care of you, we're going to take care of you. And that's Gen X. I'm like the edge of Gen X and millennial. So at 47, I was on that bridge, but I came from the generation where all the boomers were right in front of us and they had all the jobs and you weren't going anywhere soon. So you just took their word for it. You're like, okay, I'm going to follow their lead and we'll be good. And if you did your job, you would move up. And if you didn't, you wouldn't. And this generation that came out is more like, no, 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 I want you to literally tell me, if I do this, what happens? And if I do that, what happens? And so we started to do these reviews, these annual reviews, which we didn't do. We did more of like the off the cuff ones. And one of my younger or youngest employees came to me and she said, "Can I have a one-on-one?" And she comes into my office, and I'm CEO of the company, and it's still small enough that we do the one-on-one in my office. She comes in and she goes, "You know what I loved about this company when I joined it was that you weren't like the bigger companies I worked for. And now we're doing these yearly annual reviews, and they feel corporate, and they feel stuffy, and they feel like it's disconnected." And I went back to my COO, and we sit and talked about it, and she said, "You know, you love your life model, you teach your life model to everybody. What if we brought the life model to our annual reviews?" And we asked everybody if they wanted to take part in it, so they didn't have to do anything they didn't want to, and every single person committed to it. And it changed everything. But that young person and that challenge was one where I thought I was going in the direction we were supposed to, but it reminded me that maybe I was forgetting what made the experience and the company fun in the first place.
Ah, I love several things about this, but one is that person felt like they could have the conversation, and some of those listening may think, well, I have people, and maybe it's a younger generation. I don't make myself look very approachable. They still come and have that conversation with me, but I do think, often people are having a lot of thoughts or a pit in their stomach before they do have that, and at some point they make a choice. Do I want to suggest this or do I not? What do I think is going to happen? And for people to have it, they generally think that there's going to be at least some response or consideration to it, which there was. On the flip, as a leader, again, you sometimes hear these things and it's an idea and you think, okay, I get it, this is your perspective, but we need to do this and this is why we're doing this. And it really is more of a one way, an explanation why. But having that conversation back and forth, and also having the life methodology that allows you to consider how work and life intersect and what people really want. Making it optional, I think, is incredibly important, because one thing I say is, as a leader, something that's important to know is nobody on your team should feel like they have to share things about them, especially personal things. People, for a variety of reasons, including opening up their social media app and seeing a million people telling them never share anything about yourself at work. But people shouldn't feel like they have to. But too often people feel afraid to share the real parts of themselves and their lives outside of work. And so when you have an organization that says, hey, we'll consider these things, and sometimes there's going to be tough conversations, but that creates such a level of trust. And those are the type of things that I do think can start to create a real corporate culture and not just have pockets of manager culture all over the place.
Yeah, I just finished reading the Trillion Dollar Coach about Bill Campbell, who was the coach to all of the Silicon Valley, Steve Jobs and Gates and like everybody. He was on the Apple board, and apparently he was really rough around the edges, but he was also somebody that led with love, led with empathy, was the kind of leader that would tell you how it was, but also felt that everyone felt approachable. There were so many takeaways that I listened to in that. I listened to a lot of the Audible and I read the book as well, but I go back and forth because I'm moving, so I need both. And but it was so interesting because there were so many things that I found that were valuable at the beginning of these companies that I saw leaders in our company doing, or people that I've been around doing, and I really was able to think back and say, these are examples of things that obviously have played out really well at Google or at Apple. And imagine if it can work there, it can work, anywhere. And so it was interesting. I don't know if you read that book or not, but it was super
No,
interesting.
I haven't, but I've heard of that. But I'd love to know, like, what's one example that you thought of, like a practice that's like, maybe was at Google, but something that's been implemented at smaller org.
I think my favorite thing that I took away was something that I always do. So if I had a motto that was life first, right? And I can't tell everyone that life's first and then not take a moment to talk about anyone's life. And so every time we have a meeting, anytime there's something that happens, at any Zoom, anything, I always lead everything with a few minutes of life. I want to know, what's going on? Where were you this weekend? What were you? Is there something fun? If they could share anything they want, right? Well, Bill always said he always started his meetings off with vacation talk, basically. And it was his way of gathering something like, where's some place that you've been that I need to know about? And people lit up when they talked about going somewhere, but they opened up as a human before they opened up professionally. And so that was a small takeaway that I've always believed in, but it was almost a validation. It was nice to see it at a interesting level, written down in a concept book by the heads of Google. And that was one small thing. It was a lot of moments like that. I'm a relationship over transaction person, so to me, work and life should mend in a way that and work in a way that feels comfortable, not something that feels like a push and a pull constantly. And I think all too often that's what we get tied into. And when it feels that bad, it's not the right thing.
I I I really love that. I'm pausing to think of my right words, but I think that example, that vacation one, is such a good one. It reminds me of how I've seen it play out personally, and in a really strong leadership context. Is I worked at KFC Yum Brands. I worked on their restaurant sports center, which is like a corporate sports center, and I was part of the legal team. And we had people in all sorts of levels, and I had an assistant. And our office, or our department, was pretty close to the president's office, the president of KFC. He was originally from New Zealand, but had largely worked in Australia, and was
Ashley, I'm
in.
sorry, that wasn't the Colonel. Sorry,
It was
I couldn't help but I have this
the
picture of
pres.
Colonel Sanders in my brain.
Well, have you ever have you ever
Sorry to
seen?
take you off your track. I'm sorry, but
Now,
that was so fun.
you've made me laugh because now, if you've ever seen, I want people to pause, or if you have a second screen, you're on device, don't stop listening to this. But if
Right.
you go and look up the image of the Colonel, you will see the Colonel with like the black
Yeah.
black tie. But as someone pointed out, I saw someone share this on social media, that someone's like, I thought it was like a stick figure, of like a dancing figure, because the bow tie looks like it. And so if you go
Oh,
look at the image,
okay.
you will have a laugh, and it's a screenshot you can share with somebody else and probably
Okay.
make
See,
them.
it's
You'll never
perfectly
see it the
good.
same. Perfectly good. So sadly, my boss was not the Colonel. But the first
Colonel.
time
Okay.
I heard the term fireside chat, I thought we were going to the museum, because there was a Colonel Sanders museum at KFC's headquarters and had a fireplace in it.
Wow.
I didn't get that corporate speak until I did. I did learn that. But the president of KFC, he would come and chat with us all the time, and he would chat in a very genuine and approachable way. And the vacation question is one that I think a lot of leaders are like, oh, great, I'll talk about vacation. But if you kick off that conversation and you're talking to a broader group, so people of not just at the C-suite level, but people across the organization, and you start talking about your vacation, oh, we just went on this safari in South Africa, we went to the Maldives, we did these things, other people can kind of shut down in that conversation. They
Yeah.
get really embarrassed. And I saw this happen because it was the summertime, and I was talking to my assistant about how she was getting ready to go on vacation. And the president stopped and said, oh, where are you going? And he actually did not go, despite being from New Zealand and Australia, he didn't really talk about the ostentatious vacations, but he'd said, where are you going? And my assistant said, oh, I'm just going to this lake I like Dale Hollow Lake, which is like a lake in Kentucky. It's, a lot of houseboats, and it's, fun. And she starts downplaying it. She's like, it's just a, a spot our family likes, kind of hometown. It's not that fancy. And he's like, oh, that sounds so interesting. Anyway, months and months later, he came back and stopped and said, we have a trip booked to Dale Hollow Lake because you recommended it. Like his wife, his kid. And so I remember when she was like, her eyes absolutely lit up, because too often people at different levels of the organization, and vacation is one way to look at it, but they often feel like, they're not worthy of the life that you have because you're an executive. They're not worthy of your attention. Like, the power dynamics are so very real. And so when you have these leaders that they show you they're approachable, and you don't have to go, take a vacation to some certain spot, but when you show an interest in others and then follow back up on that and focus it on them, not just yourself, that type of leadership, it impacts, it impacts the way the person talks that day. I remember she said to me, can you believe that? I hope he's not disappointed when he goes to this lake. And we had a great time, but it impacts that in so far longer. And so when you as a leader recognize, the power dynamics, but showing that genuine interest in other people, and sometimes it's those ways that seem really minor, it can have such an outsized impact on the work that they do, their career, but also their life outside of work.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think it's such a great story, and it's also something that I think great leaders look at everybody as an equal party to what we're all building together. There's a we versus I. I think awful leaders use their title as the only thing in its power, and that's something in the corporate environment you see a little bit more than I would want to see, where just because you have the title, you have to use it, and sometimes great leaders that don't use the title have to remind the title to somebody because if they don't, they're walked all over. But that's an example of your CEO literally being interested, not just interesting. And it's because he was genuinely open to ideas. I think it's also sometimes a little lonely at that level, and nobody seems to care about where you're going because they know you can afford it and they know that you can do whatever. And so, there's we do a Monday morning huddle, and we've done it for years, and everybody kind of talks about what they did over the weekend, and the team becomes so much tighter and because they know what everyone's doing, they'll be like, "Hey, how was the snow you got this weekend?" Or, "Oh my god, how was the trip to Italy or Greece?" And, and it's funny, I'm always a little hesitant to share too much because I know that it shuts people down. So I try more to invoke that conversation, but it's something I always try to be aware of, but it's true. I remember being that kid new in work going, "Oh my gosh, if I could ever just go to some of these places these people are going to." It's so disconnected. But what a good leader. I like that. So it was
Yeah.
fun to work for him?
It was great. It was great to work with him. The only bone I had to pick with him, I'll say, is my family and I, my husband, two kids, we moved to Australia. Like from that job, my husband had the opportunity to go with his work, so I actually had to leave KFC. I returned to a prior company, but about a month or two before we were leaving, it was in Louisville. It was a gross day. It was like cold, stormy, and he came by my office and he pointed out the window and he said, none of this. You're moving to Sydney, short sleeves every day, amazing. Oh, this is great. I'd never been to Australia before we moved, but so we moved like end of May, end of May is 2016, but end of May. And those that have ever been to Australia at this point in time will know my reality. So we got there, arrived at 6 a.m. Anyway, that day it got dark at like 4:15 p.m. and it was cold. It was dark. I had to wear a fleece. I was like, oh, it's like No Rats in America, an American Tale. I feel
Yeah.
like I've been sold a bag of goods. So I did send him I also felt comfortable. I sent him an email laughing, and he said, yeah, there is that part, but it'll warm up. It'll warm up and sun up quickly enough. And so I really love those approachable leaders. And so those listening, I think to the extent that you haven't had those conversations, it's never too late to start. And that's a fear I think a lot of people have is, okay, well, that would be weird if I just start asking these personal questions. And so often it's going up to someone and saying, yeah, I was thinking to myself, I wish I'd asked this previous, but I don't want to not ask because it would be weird now. But I'd love to know like the things that you care about outside of work, or what are things that you wish other people knew more about your work here to the extent you're comfortable. Again, giving people the container that they can choose how to fill it. And then also taking notes for yourself. You don't have to do it right there. That might feel a little weird to you and to them to take notes as they talk. But after the fact, noting those things down, because you're not a server at a Michelin star restaurant. It's okay and it's a good thing to take notes, but following up on those things with people, I completely believe it can just change people's work, but also their day to day experience. We all want to feel more human, and there's a lot that you can do as a leader to set that tone.
Yeah, people wanna feel heard. They wanna know that they exist in a way that goes beyond just their job.
Yeah,
I don't think it's fun to be just defined by their job. I say this often on this podcast, but I've given 4 eulogies in my life and for all 4 of my grandparents, and not once did I talk about what they did for a living. You talk about who they love, how they loved, what they loved. You talk about the people that came in and out of their lives or the way they made you feel. That's what people want. And so when we have the ability to have those conversations in a work environment, we can exponentially make life better for them at home. It's just so impactful. I think that it's challenging and it's not something we become a more we're more and more productive. 2020 kind of changed a lot. I think we saw, the example I use is I'm in Northern Virginia right now, and there's like a foot of snow still on the ground, which I'm not a huge fan of. Um, but in the old days when snow would fall, my wife's a school teacher. She's retired now, but we had this conversation in Puerto Rico. She's like, "I love snow." I was like, "What do you love about snow?" And she goes, "I love the fact that everything stops. It just slows down and everybody's home." And I said, "Well, let me tell you what my last snow day was. It snowed and I sat on 6 Zoom meetings in a row while all the kids in the neighborhood played outside, and I felt worse about myself than I have in years." Like, it was awful because productivity has enhanced. Our ability to communicate has gotten, these are all better things, but man, it can be challenging when that kind of pressure starts hitting.
It is. I mean, in the in the book I wrote, I won't drop it, but I start one chapter literally talking about that, and it's not the snow day situation, but I can relate to that exactly, especially working corporate and seeing friends that make Facebook posts saying, "I don't know why people complain when there's a snow day. Appreciate your kids." I think, well, I want to appreciate my kids. I can't because I don't know what's expected of me. I have these things on my calendar, and I'd love to see if I could not attend one, but I don't want to bring that up again. Like, I don't want to piss off my boss or somebody else. Oftentimes people don't know. And so I do think often leaders can, when they know that there's a snow day, saying, "Is there something on your calendar? Maybe you can take a time, and whether you want to go outside and play with your kids or you just need a decompression time," and taking that step to figure it out. I mean, I talk about this, about a vacation I'd gone on with my girlfriends. And it was one of those, it was a girls' trip. It was going to be at the beach. Text group was going crazy every day, planning dinners, planning outfits, plan. But I was just getting more stress leading up to it because of work. And I ended up spending a full day at this beach house in the basement working on a presentation that was basically a free presentation, for my then boss. As a favor to my boss, I was really getting nothing for it, but yet spend the whole time. And it felt terrible. I felt like I wasn't doing enough for the work because I was in such a bad mood. I felt guilty and I'm so frustrated. Um, and so I think those moments and the reality of that impacted retention, how long I wanted to stay at that job, engagement, how I cared about it, impacted my quality of life. So if I say, if leaders sometimes care about nothing else, in the US, healthcare premiums tend to be tied to work. You tend to have much healthier employee population. If you do treat people like humans, it's amazing how many things can really stem from things like that. And when you give people some grace and some space, and you do that proactively as a leader, you can make such an impact in ways that just have ripple effects that continue on.
Yeah, I think I can relate. Early on in my career, there were so many times where I was so afraid to separate because I felt like I was getting behind. And, it's the thing I'm most embarrassed about as I age. When I look back on the pace of life and how much I get done and how in such a small amount of time, and how I time block or I create space or I take a midday nap or I do like things that people would be like, "Oh," even I would look back at myself and go, "There's no way you'll ever do these things." And, but it is challenging. And I think one of the biggest stressors is how we are with our families, in that takes away from our ability to detach in the way that we should from our jobs. And that was something that I think, yeah, you can do more the more successful you become, but your kids don't ask for more until they know more exists. So I went to one Holiday Inn and swam in a pool as a kid as a vacation, and that was pretty much it. And I thought it was the greatest thing that I ever had happen in my life. I still remember it. And my kids went to, like, Four Seasons and all kinds of, like, really kick-ass spots, and it's a whole different ballgame, and now they're like my son's going on spring break, and I said, "Look, dude, I'm just gonna tell you, it's not gonna be the kind of place that you're used to going to, and, it might be the place you were used to going to early in your life when dad and mom were starting out, but not." He's my oldest, so he's been through the trajectory, but it is funny, and these are things that you probably. So what did you do, Ashley, to change that? What What was that's obviously a turning point in your life. How did you come out of that moment and kinda come full circle? I saw one other point I'll make. You had one of your best jobs ever, was it like a 9 to 5? And
Yeah.
you were actually done, and you had this freedom and flexibility and better family life, and so I imagine these are some of the things that started to move you towards where you are today.
Yeah. I mean, in that, I left law firm life, and that's where I'd done, I spent the girls' trip working in the basement was when I was working in a law
A
firm.
law
And
firm, okay.
yeah, and the realities of that often you're at beck and call. I actually do think there's different ways you can work. At the time, I kind of took it as this is the way it is, and often I think it can be. But but I went to go work in house. Actually, went to work directly for a client, and oftentimes you hear in house, like going from working for a firm to working directly for one company, and you hear about it like it's like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow of this is going to be an amazing experience. I've since learned from different experiences. My first in-house job truly was like a 9 to 5. Yeah, plenty others are not, and so it's important to have a reality of what that was. But when I interviewed, so I interviewed with the general counsel of a publicly traded company, um, a man who was a dad, but he had a wife that stayed home. They had a nanny. His kids were teenagers, so he had no necessarily reason to understand what my life was like. Yeah, I had my husband and I both worked. I had a toddler at the time, and in my law firm job, I was traveling all over the country all of the time. In addition to kind of working all the time, like that's just where all my cases were. But he proactively said, and he didn't just have good news to explain. He right out the gate said, coming here, this is a pay cut. It ended up being about 20-25% pay cut. He's like, it is what it is. And so that's a decision that you have to make. But he's like, part of your compensation package is an 8 to 5 schedule. And we do good work. We have a lot of fun, but it's not nights and weekends work. And we've really found a way. And this was at the time, $1 billion company. There were 3 lawyers. And we not only did legal, we really did the strategic HR function. Yet they found a way to create a work that balanced lives. And for me, not only did this work, but when I took vacation, it was the first time in my professional life that I took a vacation without my laptop. And the way I did that was my colleague. So I had, we had the general counsel, and then I had a colleague who was senior to me, but we divided a lot of the operational things, and we decided to have access to each other's inboxes and emails. So if she was out, I could look through and see, okay, if she'd been working on something, this, and we met, we talked through things, what were going on. If something popped up, I could look at her inbox, she could look at mine. But this system, I mean, it absolutely, like, that separation transformed the person I was for my family, for my husband, for my kids, for my daughter at the time, for myself. But it also impacted the work I did. I mean, I looked forward to Monday mornings, which is not something many lawyers can say. And
Right.
I really felt fortunate for that. But it made me realize if you come up with an idea and say, this is what we're going to do this and we're going to figure it out. Sometimes there may be exceptions. Like literally one time we were working on a huge double-sided deal, like huge deal. And he's like, we got to stay late. And we stayed till 6 o'clock. And so I'll be here till 7 if you need. But that showed me how possible it is to really thread the needle and do good work. But also when you incorporate the things that really matter in people's lives, and that I feel fortunate to have that experience, and it really informed a lot of the work I do now.
Yeah, something, that's great, and something that I think isn't mentioned enough, and, growing up, my mom was when Working Mother magazine came out, my mom was a paralegal at a big law firm. She worked more hours, than my dad did. My dad worked a more, 7 AM to 4 PM. He was home at exactly, like, 4:12 every day. He played multiple sports, and he was very active. My mom worked longer and had a different life, and so I had this experience growing up of constantly wishing she was around more. And, when all your friends at that time, almost all your friends' parents were like, they'd walk in, they had milk and cookies waiting for them, And like my wife gave our kids as a teacher. And so, in a corporate environment, I was in charge early on as a financial advisor in training and recruiting female advisors. At the time, it was less than 15% of the entire body of advisors in the industry. It's still underrepresented significantly. But I learned something. I led the country with like 5 or 7 or something at one time, and I remember just watching the amount of time and energy and work that had to be done in shorter pockets, something that me and my buddies didn't have to do. So if I was gonna work late, Ashley, I would just call my wife and say, "I'm gonna work late." And okay, guess what? The kids are fine. Then now, get granted, I want everyone to understand, I understand roles have changed a lot, and they changed a lot in our generation. So this is a new thing still that people don't talk about because they're afraid of offending people. But the reality is, it's not offensive to talk about the truth, and it's not offensive to talk about the reality that I remembered that, and I remember being so impressed with the amount of work that was done in short pockets of time that when I went and built my company, almost my whole senior management team was women because it allowed us to have that better work-life balance almost automatically. It was when you were at work, you were at work. When you weren't, versus the guys who would come in and want to talk, and not all the guys, but a lot of the guys want to come in and talk football for an hour in the morning, or like, and I got to the point where I was like, I always go back to my mom, and my COO is one of my best friends, and she's been with me for 20 something years. Her family is extremely close. Her husband and I are great friends. My wife is great friends. So she also is a lot like my mom, but I always look at her as somebody that if my mom if would have been in corporate America and someone would have seen the work ethic, the time, the energy, she would have had a career that was, 2 to 3 times more upward mobility and more balance in her life. Maybe it would be one or the other. She listens to the podcast. I'm not judging you, Mom. You did a great job. I'm just saying that these are the things I think about, but I've led that way. And I share that because I don't think a lot of people that are, maybe they are, maybe they understand it. For the women that are listening, you understand, but a lot of the guys also don't understand the impact that has on a family.
Yeah. I think it absolutely is true. And it's the ripple effect of what you create when you think about what's possible. I mean, I know my boss used to call in this job. He used to call myself, my assistant. He called us the Gone Girls because at 5 o'clock we were gone. In part, I live in Atlanta traffic. Like if I'm not gone, I'm going to be
Awful.
there
Yeah.
forever. I'll be there till 7 or 8. I'll do whatever work. But he would joke and call us the Gone Girls. But it was there was never, do you want to stay? But if somebody else was visiting once, they said, oh, do they always leave so early? And my boss took up for us and he said they do great work while they are here, and they are efficient at what they do, and they have this, and it is amazing the things that they get done. Sometimes I can't believe how much that they absolutely get done. And so it is thinking about the container that you are creating, and then the ripple effect of how you work with people. The person, yeah, there were working hours that were great, but if that being said, if I were there and my boss kept saying, "Oh, gone girls, you're lucky to be here," or had like a threatening tone, or came down on me and filled those hours with making me feel badly about myself, well, that can impact the person I then am when I drive in traffic. Who am I? Who am I taking things out on? Because I'm probably not going to talk back to my boss, but I might, when I get home, pick a fight with my husband, because we tend to sometimes take things out on the people we
Yeah.
love. And so then the kids
No,
go to the top
we
of the
never do that.
stairs, and it's and so that the flip is, I mean, the person, I mean, I really say the person I was in that job, and again, doing some great work. I mean, I read books at night. I mean, I would come home and be like, let's go to the park. I'll make dinner. Like, you can have such an incredible ripple impact as a leader when you figure out how to really thread the needle between driving performance without driving people out the door.
Yeah, and actually separating your level of joy in life from your success. So, I think that's something the older I got, the easier it was to do. And maybe, I think some people will say, well, yeah, because you had a certain level of success, so it made it a little easier. I don't know, because sometimes the more you surround yourself with people that have done more, the more you know it can happen, and so there's this drive to wanna do more, but creating that white space to be able to read a book, to be able to think, thinking time is something that people don't talk about enough, but just having time to think and be creative. So you got to think and you were creative and you put out a book. Talk to us about the book and tell us, I think it's coming out right, so probably right around the time we launch this show. So that'll be great. You could probably pick it up anywhere, but just give me the trajectory to get to the book and then how people can find it when it launches.
I mean, the directory is like a lot of people, like this, things that people may see on LinkedIn, like, oh, wow, that's amazing. That's so great. How can I do that? I say, well, I can tell you where to start. In a decade from now, I can hopefully tell you where you'll end up, because I look back and it was notes that I'd started taking over a decade ago that those things still ring true in the book, things like performance management. And so in my career quilt, some of what I did is I worked at organizations like KFC, and I saw, some high-powered executives on the corporate side, but also restaurant managers in restaurants that were driving business, knew their people. I also worked at organizations like McKinsey. So I was a lawyer at McKinsey. I became their head of HR of North America and was in the role and realized, I felt like the only person that did not have 5 Ivy League degrees. I did not have any. And it was really, the imposter syndrome has no greater place than to look at the intranet and people's bios where you think, oh my gosh. But for me, I just saw people at all levels across industry. There were so many common issues of people promoted into leadership positions without a real understanding of what the role is like. People feel like they're winging it. They don't know how to have conversations. They avoid them. They're too harsh. They're too lenient. And so a lot of the conversations I had were pretty close to identical, whether someone was a senior partner at McKinsey or restaurant or in media and the different industries I've worked in. And so really it's put it together to have a framework, a simple 3-part framework that you can read about in the book, and all sorts of examples of how to bring it to life, no matter what level you are in management, no matter your industry. And so the title is The Manager Method. A practical framework to lead, support, and get results. I had to make sure I did those in that order. So it really is covering all. And you can get it at any bookstore. And I do have it in hard copy and digital, also audiobook. I recorded it in studio,
Nice.
which is fun. And if you go to managermethod.com, which is my website, and go to /book, you can get resources from a reflection guide if you're reading it on your own. Also a book club guide if you want to start a book club and have questions already done for you.
So as a teaser, I want our listeners to have the tight jeans, oversized sweatpants, and cozy joggers. And if you could just give, leaders and managers can be, I guess, 3 different versions. What are your 3 analogies? And give everybody a little teaser, because I think this will be a great way to be interested in the book.
Tight jeans is if you're that protectionist manager I talked about close to the beginning of the episode, where you're hovering over your teams and saying, like, send me your emails for review, or I'll attend those meetings. Don't do this because you're getting so close. And so you're exhausted. They feel constricted, like a pair of non-stretch tight jeans straight from the dryer. So tight jeans management is a really, really common, I wouldn't just say trap, but way managers, try to lead. Sometimes you over-rotate, especially if you've had that type of tight jeans leader and you become oversized sweatpants. This may be you if you say to your teams, I don't need one-on-ones, come find me if you need me. But then your phone, your email, your chat are all blowing up by people all having emergencies, and your team maybe doesn't know exactly what's expected. That's over-rotating to the oversized sweatpants. So cozy joggers is right there in the middle. And what I say, that's the structured autonomy. So those are ways to give your team the support that they need, so they're not just untethered, but also to give yourself time and energy back as a leader so that you're not trying to do everything or catch up over the fact. And so this book gives all sorts of examples of how you can become cozy joggers.
So do we have a brand that we think about when we think about the 3 types? I'm just curious. Is it like the old Jordache jeans? Is it are the oversized sweatpants like the Janko type looking style? And then maybe the cozy joggers are a nice pair of Vuori or something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, totally. It's exactly right. And I'd say even Jordache is like the high end, like the jeans that my mom used to, take me to get, like the non fancy brand
Yeah, it was
tight
like they
ones.
weren't
But
even
yeah.
Wranglers; they were like anglers.
Yeah,
Like
angler, and
right.
I try to get some white out to make them look a little more legit. But yes, but then the nice Vuori at the end, you can travel in them. Oh, what are those? What are those? But the type of pants that Instagram is going now, it's going to serve everybody. The type of pants that you can wear on a plane into a meeting, but they feel comfortable and give that support. So now whatever Instagram throws at you.
That's my favorite part of being older and more established in business is the I don't give a damn about what you think I look like as long as I'm presentable and professional and I'm not going to wear like joggers per se, but I definitely try not to wear a tie like 98% of the time. And these are the things that like early on like you
Oh,
have to almost overdress to impress so that you make sure that you're showing up and that was so I can't wait for the day that I just wear a pair of Uris to work, and
I mean,
that's the way to do it.
I was of the generation, I'm dating myself a little bit, but when I graduated law school, I can't remember if it was in the rules or not. If it was not actually in the local rules, it was a direct rule that I, as a female attorney, was to wear a skirt suit and pantyhose. I'm also in the South, but that was the way it is. And so now the idea of being able to giving leadership tips in a pair of Vuoris can certainly be. I feel more relaxed and tend to give better advice that way.
Yeah, the legal community is one that hasn't that was very archaic. When you can actually fight the law and you're not afraid of judges, that's not a good recipe for success when it comes to treating people a little bit better, especially women in the business. So, having those old school rules is definitely rough, but it's changed a lot. So
It's changed a lot, and I'll give one more teaser, which is I love the story about your mother. My mom actually became a paralegal in her late 40s, and then went to law school and became a lawyer in her 50s, and started as an intern at her state agency, and retired just a couple of years ago as a general counsel. And so she had gone to law school later in life. That was one of her squares in her career quilt, and so I
that's
definitely
awesome.
and she wrote the preface to my book. I also have a foreword from someone else, but she wrote the preface, and so it's very meaningful. So I figured my mom would only write kind words about me, which she did. So I appreciate her.
Yeah, it's pretty good. That's pretty good. And she did it for you, which is even better. That's
Yeah, I
good.
know. I
Well,
only have to give her time with the grandkids. That's I got to
yeah.
do that. So
Yeah, well, I feel like as my kids are now out of the house and less engaged and involved with college and the stuff that we're in that stage of, I could tell you, my brother has 2 kids under the age of 2 right now. They're under 3, so the oldest hasn't even turned 3 yet, and we're like grandparents. I mean, we're just in Puerto Rico, and my wife and I are calling, "Hey, Sophia, how was your day?" I mean, we're calling every day and we look at each other and we hang up. We're young enough to know that we're totally geeking out. And my brother and his wife, they play right into it. I'm so grateful for it. And so we call ourselves out on it. We know we're doing the grandparent thing, but we're not just showing up randomly. That's the one thing we're
that's
not doing.
that's showing up and staying for 3 weeks. Hello, here
Oh
I am.
man, but you miss it. It is, you're giving your mom what she needs. That's
Yeah,
all she needs is
that's
that
right.
love. So
That's right.
well, thanks for sharing your story and your quilt with us. It's been a great time getting to know you and your story. I hope everybody picks up a copy of the book. I hope it has great success. I know this is a sprint, like this 90-day sprint that you do of just getting it out to everybody, but it'll be well worth it, and I'm sure it will receive great praise.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm really glad to have our conversation.
So YouTube has this cool feature where they pick the next video for you, and it's right here on this screen. So I hope you enjoy this next video.